Okay, so I'm going to kind of run this group like I run my monthly cancer-related cognitive impairment or CRCI support group here at City of Hope Atlanta. And if any of you are Atlanta patients, I hope that I'll get to meet you in person one day. You can join our group. We meet once a month up in the Cancer Funder area. So what you may be wondering, like, what's cancer-related cognitive impairment? I've heard a lot about chemo brain. I've heard people call it brain fog, but what actually is it? I have been at City of Hope now for 10 years and almost a month. And when I started here 10 years ago, there was this whole idea in the medical community to see if cognitive impairment as a side effect of cancer treatment was actually real, or was it just fatigue that made people not be able to think correctly? I can now say that 10 years later, the medical community is on board that cancer-related cognitive impairment, or CRCI, is a side effect of treatment. And so therefore, just like the side effect of, losing your hair or gaining weight or losing weight, nausea, vomiting, all the other side effects that you can get from cancer treatment, you can also experience cognitive changes. And research in this area in the last decade has revealed that there's really some common symptoms that when you have cancer-related cognitive impairment. So the first one is short-term memory deficit. So this may be that you have a conversation with a family member or a loved one. You say, oh yeah, I'd love to go to that barbecue on Saturday. I'll be there. I'll bring some baked beans, love it. And then Saturday rolls around and your cousin calls you and says, where are you? You say, oh, I'm at my house. Why? And like, yeah, we have the barbecue. You were supposed to be bringing the baked beans. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Yeah, you're right. You told me that. That could be an example of a short-term memory deficit. Other examples of short-term memory deficits can be, I can't find my belongings. I have my patients tell me this all the time. Like, Jennifer, I used to lose my keys, but I now lose my keys daily. I cannot find them. I'm late every day when I'm going somewhere because I can't get out the door. Can't find my purse. I can't find my shoes. Can't find my keys. I can't find my phone. That could be an example of short-term memory deficit. Other examples of deficits that I hear are patients saying, like, Jennifer, I have kept my finances for 40 plus years. This was actually a patient that I had one time. He came in and I was like, what's going on? And he's like, listen, kept my finances for 40 plus years. I've been great at it. I have a whole Excel spreadsheet. I check it off. He goes, my wife's retired. She works from home now as a side gig with Amazon, so we get a discount. And she came upstairs the other day and was like, call Comcast because the internet's down. I'm in the middle of my shift. And he goes, and I thought, you know what? I'm about to get this month free. He goes, I called Comcast and they politely tell me that I hadn't paid my bill in 3 months. And he says, I was mortified. How did I forget to pay my bill for 3 months? And he goes, I look back on my spreadsheet. He goes, I checked it off like I had paid it. He goes, but I look back, I had not paid it for 3 solid months. Those are all examples of short-term memory deficits that you may be experiencing with cancer-related cognitive impairment. A second symptom that patients always report are word-finding issues. This can look different things. It can be simple words. You can say, pass me the, and you're looking at this right here, and you cannot think of the word pen. And you're like, pass me the, the thing I write with. It has ink. You're like, how in the world did I forget the word pen, right? You also might find that you can't remember people's names like you used to. So you can tell all about them. You can be like, oh, that's the woman who sits on the second pew at church. She's got the red hair. Her son's John. She's got the 5 grandchildren. And you can give all these details, but you cannot remember that woman's name is Susan. And she can be staring at you and you're like, oh my gosh, what is her name? Okay. So those are examples of word finding issues. I've had a lot of patients who are like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. Like if I have to talk to people, like I feel like they're saying, are you losing your mind just because I can't find the words? And they said, I feel like I'm using the word thing and stuff a lot more than I used to. That just kind of a side note about word finding issues, you're going to find that those are more pronounced when you've had less sleep and the more fatigued you are. And that's honestly for anybody, cancer or not. All of us, if we're tired, we have a harder time finding words. So my husband always says, oh, it's time for you to go to bed. And I'll go, why? And he goes, because you're the speech therapist. You can't come up with a word. You're calling thingamajig or passing the doohickey, which are the words I use when I can't think of a word. So those happen to all of us when we're tired. What you're going to find it is much more pronounced and much worse with cancer-related cognitive impairment. The third most common symptom that you see with cancer-related cognitive impairment is multitasking and divided attention issues, okay? So this is where previously you could have been on the phone, typing an email, doing multiple things at once. And you now find like if you're on the phone and then you're trying to do something else, you're either going to tell the people on the phone the wrong information, or you're going to write down something incorrectly. You no longer can juggle two activities. This may be more easily seen with cooking. Cooking is very much a multitasking, divided attention issue. Like you're chopping up, vegetables over here, but you've turned on the oven and you're putting on, you're putting in the casserole over here and you've got this many minutes. And then, oh, the water's boiling. You're having to go between multiple tasks at once. So I find a lot of times that my patients with cancer-related cognitive impairment will say things like, Jennifer, I'm burning my food. Like I'm burning food, or I'm forgetting ingredients. Like, I missed a key ingredient. And so that casserole came out. I thought, that looks weird. It's never looked like that before. So those are kind of things that I hear with people who are saying they're having multitasking or divided attention issues. This seems to also be pronounced not just with cooking, but in working. So a lot of my patients who come to see me because they are having cognitive issues are patients who are their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, still having to work jobs because that's how they keep their insurance. Their insurance is what's paying for their cancer treatment. And they're finding that like they cannot do their jobs at the same level as they did previously. They find that they're much slower at doing their work. They can't find, where previously they could be running emails, do this, and they just cannot. And so what might have taken them 1 hour at work to accomplish, they say is now taking 3 and 4 hours to accomplish. And then they're always questioning themselves, did I do that correctly? Is that okay? So, these aren't the only symptoms, but what research has shown is that the 3 most common symptoms that you find with cancer-related cognitive impairment. This does not have to be, you don't have to have all 3. You might just have 1, 2, or in many cases, most of my patients say, oh yeah, no, I got all 3 of those. That's the issues with all 3 of those. When I started here 10 years ago, the research said like 15 to 35% of cancer patients had some sort of cognitive changes. That's gone up significantly. The research is now showing that it could be up to 75% of patients who have cancer have some sort of cognitive changes during or after treatment. So, and what we're finding too is that patients, while we've become really great at fighting cancer, and so patients are living much longer with cancer, and so they're more in the survivorship mode, more patients are raising their hands to be like, hey, I'm a survivor, but whoa, I am not thinking like I was before. And so I really, and my mission has tried to be in the last 10 years here at City of Hope Atlanta, is just trying to get the word out that cancer-related cognitive impairment is a side effect of treatment. It can happen, but you don't have to just live like this for the rest of your life. I think a lot of patients just think like, oh, guess I'm just gonna have to live like this. But there are things that we can do. We're going to talk today about some ways that you can help with your cancer-related cognitive impairment. And that's what my next slide's about. And, just so you realize, like, I don't have to stay just like this. So here's my next one's the tips for dealing with CRCI. What I find most when I'm giving evaluations for patients with cancer-related cognitive impairment is that they talk about, I cannot remember what people tell me. And what I find in my testing is their verbal memory, so that memory of you hearing something and remembering it, is much lower with patients with cancer-related cognitive impairment than their ability to see information and remember, okay? So what we find is patients who maybe previously, and I'll give you some examples of real-life patients I've had, like I have, a patient who said, hey, I never had to take notes. Like, if I needed to do something, I just could remember it. I didn't have to write down what I was being told. But now, like, you can tell me information and 5 minutes later, I'm not gonna be able to tell you more than half of what you said. And so the deal is just being able to hear and retain seems to be really impacted by cancer-related cognitive impairment. So my first tip is the importance of making information visual. So if you can see it, it's much easier to remember it. And so here's some examples of ways you can make information visual. I tell patients, you got to talk to your families about texting important information. So I know that, patients, your families love to converse. They want to call, they want to talk to you, they want to make sure you're okay, they want to have these conversations. But the deal is these conversations can be quite long and they're probably full of information. So when there's something important in there, I tell my patients, you need to cue your family to be like, that's great. So excited. Like, go back to my barbecue example. I'm so excited that we're having this barbecue on Saturday. Just so I don't forget, when we get off this phone, can you text that information back to me? Can you just send a text that says, hey, barbecue Saturday at John's house, bring the baked beans, 4 o'clock, so that way I can keep up with the information. I've found that a lot of patients say, oh yes, that works so much better if I can see the information, then I can write it down, I can put it on my calendar. It's just it's easy to keep up with, because honestly, they might have told you about the barbecue in the middle of that conversation. They tell you 30 more minutes about something that's happening in their hometown. And then you're like, you get off the phone, you're like, well, that's fun. But you don't remember the barbecue information that was told in the middle of the conversation. Another way to make information visual is to leave it where you can see it. So that whole, saying out of sight, out of mind seems to be really prominent in cancer-related cognitive impairment. Patients say like, oh, no, don't see it, so I don't do it. So I tell patients it's important that you're taking your medication, right? It's important in your fight against cancer. It's also important for your cognition, because if you take your medication improperly, you can actually make memory, your ability to think, much worse. And so I tell patients, you put your medication where you can see it. That's different for every single person. Like, everybody has their own morning ritual, right? So you need to look at, if you got medication in the morning, look at your morning ritual and go, okay, you know what, like, I drink coffee every single morning. Great, you're going to put your medication or the pill box. I'm a real fan of pill boxes, but I know everybody doesn't love a pill box. Put that in front of the coffee maker, so that way it's right there. When you get up in the morning, you're like, oh yeah, I got to take that, right? The reason I'm a fan of a pill box, that's also making the information visual, is because I don't know, I hear a lot of patients tell me like, hey, Jennifer, I couldn't remember if I took my pill or not. And because I had the bottle, I had to then count the pills and be like, ooh, is that left? Ooh, I should have less than that left. If you put it in a pill box, if you're like, ooh, did I take my medication this morning? You just go back to the pill box. And if it's empty, you took it. If it's not empty, then you didn't take it. So again, using a pill box is making the information visual. Okay, having a calendar in an easy to see location. I have a lot of times I have patients tell me, oh, I try to use a calendar, but that just doesn't seem to work. And I go, okay, well, where's your calendar? And people are like, oh, well, it's over at my desk, where I write bills. And I go, well, do you go to that desk every day? Well, no. Okay, see, that's the deal. Out of sight, out of mind. You want to keep a calendar, where you can see it. Is that on your refrigerator? Is that, somewhere where you're going to be often? Is that on the back? I have some patients, they're like, girl, I put that on the right beside my bed. So that way, when I get up the next morning, I see it, I know what my plan is for the day, and I take my calendar with me to the next location. You could do that. It just really depends on where you are, make it individual to you and where you'll see it. Okay. Another way to help deal with cancer-related cognitive impairment is using alarms and reminders. Okay. So it's really important to remind yourself of information. So the way you can do that is different ways. So let's go back to my barbecue. Barbecue Saturday, you're taking the baked beans. You can make that a calendar event in your phone with a reminder. Now, I'm going to be real honest. I live off of calendar events and reminders in my own phone. Like, I get these, I have a 7-year-old. I get these birthday party invitations like a month or 6 weeks in advance. I'm not going to remember that birthday party's on that date at that time. So I go ahead and put it in my calendar. It has an alert when you go down, it's Samsung or Apple. When you go down, when you're putting in your calendar, it'll say alert. I have it send me a 1 week prior alert, a 2-day prior alert, a 3-hour prior alert. So that way I'm constantly being reminded like, okay, this is coming up. This is important. I need to remember to do this. Okay. Also, it's really helpful to use alarms when you're doing cooking and laundry. I find that a lot of my patients tell me, do you know how many times I have to wash my clothes? And I remember the very first patient who told me that. And I said, I'm going to need you to explain that. What do you mean how many times you have to wash your clothes? She goes, Jennifer, I start a load of laundry. And then I'm like, ooh, I need to go pay bills. She goes, and I go pay bills. And then I think, ooh, I need to go take this out to the mailbox. She goes, I take it out of the mailbox. And then I'm like, oh, you know what? I have time to run to the library. Let me run to the library and like return these books. And she goes, and then I get home and I cook dinner and then I go to bed and then I get up the next morning and I start doing stuff. And she goes, and then I go by the laundry room, maybe the next day, maybe 2 or 3 days after. And I'm like, oh, I washed those a few days ago. They've been sitting there. They smell sour. Got to rewash those. And so it was actually her was the first patient. I said, okay, let's try setting some alarms. Do you have an alarm on your oven? And she said, well, yeah. I said, okay, how about we try where you put the laundry in and then you go to your oven and you go ahead and put a 30-minute timer on or a 45-minute timer on. And when it goes off, then it cues you like, oh, it's the laundry. Let me go take care of that and put that in the dryer. So we try that. And she was like, you know what? Sometimes she goes, the where my kitchen oven is, it's just not working. So I had her buy one of those old timey kitchen timers. She would just, as soon as she would put it in the washer, she would turn on her little old timey kitchen timer, set it there, and then it would go off. And she was like, and that thing would drive me crazy. I'd go, oh, that's the laundry. Let me go. Because she goes, it wouldn't stop beeping until I went and turned it off all the way. So that's just another way to help remind yourself and to keep you on track. It's also great to use those alarms and timers when you're cooking, so that way you don't burn your food. Because I find that a lot of patients say, like, hey, I start a meal, I get distracted, I see Jeopardy on TV, I decide to go around the corner, Wheel of Fortune, and try to answer some questions. And then the next thing I know, I'm sitting on the couch, and then I'm like, here, oh, that's water boiling over. Let me get back up to the kitchen. So just being able to set alarms, things to remind yourself to go back to the task, is very helpful. Cognitive stimulation. I cannot emphasize this enough. And this is where the whole idea of the Brain Trainer book came from, is the idea that I was seeing all these patients here who were coming in to see me, who were telling me like, hey, I've got a short-term memory impairments, I've got the word finding. And I said, okay, so who's keeping up with your medication? My husband or wife. Okay, who's paying the bills? My husband or my wife. Okay, who's keeping up with the appointments? My husband or my wife. Okay, great. Who's like in charge of knowing like what you're going to do that day, like planning things? And I started realizing that a lot of patients, because they're not feeling well, they're not, nauseated, they just don't feel great and are tired. And because they're not thinking great, they just end up giving over a lot of the cognitive responsibilities to their family members. The problem with that is that old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's so true. So true. In fact, I have a patient who she would be more than happy for me to kind of give this example. She was one of those. She started therapy with me 6 weeks ago. She showed up and I said, okay, well, who's keeping up with your meds? And she said, my sister. I said, okay, who's paying bills? And she's like, well, my son, my bills are going at home and I live out of state because my sister's here locally and my son's sending me some stuff. And I said, okay. She goes, but, I'm not getting to pay it on time really because he's not always sending it every week. And I said, okay, well, who's keeping up with your appointments? And her sister's sitting in the corner. She's like, oh, I've got track of everything. I've got everything in my calendar. I keep up with everything. And I was like, well, like the patient, I said, well, am I wrong? Weren't you living alone prior to this? And she was like, oh yeah, I did everything on my own, but I just haven't felt great. And I've been living with my sister since August. So I really challenged her. I was like, you want to go back to living alone, right? She's like, oh my gosh, yes. So yeah, I want to be able to do that. And I was like, okay, we need to practice while you're with your sister. I need you cooking meals. I need you being in charge of coming to your own appointments. I need you to do these things so we know that you can safely do them. I need you to start, trying to stay cognitively stimulated. I need you to do some puzzles. I need you. And within those 6 weeks of therapy, I cannot tell you how much improvement we saw. Like she scored extremely low on the test that we did for memory. And after 6 weeks, we saw a huge improvement. And most of that, and she agreed, she was like, well, most of it's because you started making me do stuff. She goes, that stimulation just made my brain fog start to clear. I felt so much more like myself when I was doing things. So, excuse me. What are some ideas for cognitive stimulation? Okay, one, if you're a computer person, now I've got ideas for all folks. Okay, so if you're one of those who are like, oh, Jennifer, I'm not technologically savvy, don't be alarmed. We'll have something for you in just a minute. But the first one are apps that can go on your phone. So I've put in there 4 apps that are all free because I only believe in free apps. You should never pay for an app. And so Elevate and Peak are both cognitively stimulating apps. They have a lot of different cognitive activities, memory activities. math, like all kinds of activities, vocabulary, like word finding. Both of these will try to sell you on their plan. So like you'll do a test initially, they'll say, oh, don't you want to try this, this plan, 7-day free trial. Both Elevate and Peak have an X up in the corner of the app. So when it comes to do you want to try the 7-day free trial? If you just press the X, it gives you the free version of each app. And it's great. Both of these apps give you 3 or 4 free games a day that really stimulates your cognition. And then it lets you track over time how much better you're getting. I love those because of it. You're able to track yourself and track your progress. And then I also love it because they have free versions. You don't have to do the pay for versions, which is my deal about Luminosity. It's also a good app, but I'm not sure that they have a free version. Most of the time it ends up charging you, which I don't want to happen. The other 2 apps are for word finding, 4 Picks 1 Word and Wordscapes. So the 4 Picks 1 Word, exactly like as it sounds, that you have 4 pictures and then you have to come up with what's the one word the 4 pictures are like. And so how are they like? The first 100 levels are pretty easy. It starts to get pretty challenging after that. I'll tell you, it can be quite addicting. I have a 94-year-old grandmother who still lives alone, drives the whole gamut, and is obsessed with keeping her cognition intact. She wants to be cognitively sharp. She talks about it all the time. So several years ago, she asked me things that she could do to stay cognitively sharp, and 4 Picks 1 Word is something we put on her tablet. And she's like, I think she's on like level 1500, something crazy like that. And my mom always is joking around with me because if she can't figure it out, if my grandmother can't figure it out, she screenshots it and sends it to my mom and is like, help me on this one. I'm stuck. I need to get past this level. But truthfully, we saw improvements with her just by her staying cognitively stimulated with these activities. Wordscapes is one where it gives you a bunch of letters and then you have to create words based on the letters given. So another good word finding activity. Okay, so let's say computers are not your thing or phones. The reason I do like apps though is y'all end up in a lot of appointments where you're just waiting. You're in, even here where I feel like we do a better job of getting you in appointments, you're still going to wait at some point in time. And so by having an app like this downloaded on your phone while you're sitting and waiting, or if you're traveling to and from the center at the airport, you have something that you can do to be helping your brain. Okay, hobbies. Hobbies are great cognitively stimulating activities. So if you like to garden, garden. If you like to build model airplanes or, do those things, do it. If you like to paint, you don't have to be great at any of these things, but all of them are cognitively stimulating. Golfing, super cognitively stimulating. Anything like that can be really helpful. Even just taking walks, daily walks, is cognitively stimulating because when you're getting out and you're moving, getting your blood pumping, using our muscles, but you're also like visually taking in the environment around you and you're like, oh, I'm at a stop sign, I have to stop. Which way do I want to go? Oh, there's a car coming, let me get over. And so whether you realize it or not, you're having to cognitively plan. So hobbies are a great way to stay cognitively stimulated. I tell patients that the deal about a hobby, though, is if you have this hobby pre-cancer, it's really important that you don't compare yourself and how you're doing right now on that hobby to how you did pre-cancer. I feel like a lot of patients get reading. Let's take reading as an example. I love to read, big reader. But I find a lot of my patients who are big readers prior to cancer find reading not fun anymore, simply because they start to read and they're like, I read the same page over and over and over again. And what I challenge those people is, okay, you know what? Let's don't pick up a book to read. Like if you find that more frustrating, let's just challenge them. Let's say, okay, I'm going to read 1 magazine article a day. I'm going to read 1 news story a day online. You might have to take the hobby and break it up into smaller bits and then work your way back up. Not be like, oh, well, I'm not going to read because I can't read a book in a night like I used to. Okay, making plans. I was just telling Leslie before we got started, making plans is like a super cognitively stimulating activity. This could be planning a vacation. I love planning, love it. So if we're going on a vacation, my husband's always like, yeah, I just let you do it because you figure it all out. You figure out okay, where's the cheapest flight? Where are we going? Where's the cheapest place to stay? That's the nicest with the best reviews. All of that requires a lot of cognitive stimulation, but it doesn't have to be just a vacation. Planning a meal, is cognitively stimulating, going, ooh, you know what? I really want chicken wings, potato packet. I want that for supper. What do I need? What items do I need from the grocery store? How much time am I going to need to make this meal? And it might not even be that you have the ability to make the meal yourself, but you directing somebody else how to make the meal is also cognitively stimulating. Making plans of, oh, I'm going to the center next week and I need to pack. That's making plans. And packing is super cognitively stimulating because you have to okay, what do I need when I'm at the center? Okay, what if I end up at the center for more than the days that I'm allotted? Because I'm guessing most of you have ended up here longer than you thought you were going to be here. So you want to be like, okay, let me pack some extra things. So any kind of plans where you're having to plan ahead and think through items, or even directing others on what to do if you can't do it yourself, is cognitively stimulating. Use of the Brain Trainer book, the book that you received in the mail, also can be cognitively stimulating, and we're going to spend the next few slides talking about how to use the book. So we'll go through that. I also want to point out oncology rehab. So each site has oncology rehab at Chicago, Phoenix, here in Atlanta, Duarte, out in California. We all have oncology rehab. We all have therapists who are trained in cognition and trained on how to assess cognition and how to treat cognitive deficit. So in Chicago, Phoenix, and here in Atlanta, those are all speech therapists. So there's speech therapists at each site, and we've all been trained on cognitive rehab, and so can do in-depth cognitive assessments. And then from there, we can do therapy to help individualize it to you on how to get you where you feel like you're thinking more like yourself. And you may be thinking like, well, that's great, Jennifer, but I only come to the center once every 6 months. Well, you know what? Last year, I started a program because of people just like that. People who can only come here once every 6 months and were like, I can't find a speech therapist in my hometown. Can't find an occupational therapist, because in some areas of the country, it's occupational therapists who do cognitive therapy. Out at Duarte, that's who does it. It's the occupational therapist. So last year, we started this speech telehealth program. So all 3 sites have the ability to assess and treat cognitive deficits over telehealth. Now, there's some caveats to that. We still have to have licensures in the state that you live in. I am licensed now in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and of course, Georgia. And up in Chicago, they have licensures in all the 5 touching states plus Oklahoma. So 4 of the touching states in Oklahoma, they're licensed there. And then out in Phoenix, the speech therapist there is licensed in Arizona and California. So we are able to do cognitive therapy while you're at the house if we have a licensure in your state. The other caveat is your insurance has to cover telehealth. So and truthfully, not all insurance plans do. So we always check that before we start. But I think it's important to know that if you're like doing these small tips, like making things visual, you're making these things, but you're just not seeing the progress you need, and you feel like, okay, this is extremely frustrating, it's very limiting, my quality of life has been greatly impacted of this, please seek out therapy services. You'll need an order from your physician. So even let's say you live in a state where we're not licensed, you're in New Jersey, and I don't have anybody licensed in New Jersey. There's speech therapists there in New Jersey. So if you could go to your physician here and get an order to take to a speech therapist in your local area, or maybe your primary care physician at home can find one in your area. So just realize if you feel like this cancer-related cognitive impairment is really causing definite impacts to quality of life, there's therapy that you can do for that. So the next few slides, we're just going to go over how to use your brain trainer. First thing is, you'll notice, and I have up here, and I'm going to highlight on each of the pages, we've separated the section into different levels. I did that because cancer-related cognitive impairment is not the same for everybody. Some people have very mild deficits. In fact, so mild that when people talk to them, they really don't understand that they have a deficit at all, okay? Versus I've got other people who have pretty significant deficits where it's much more obvious that they're having cognitive side effects, and their family's having to step in a lot more to help with things. Otherwise, there's a lot of errors being made. So I had these different levels because whether you're having a mild deficit or maybe severe deficit, or maybe there are days where you just don't feel great. You feel pretty terrible. Those are days where you can start down on level 1, where you're like, oh my word, I'm just having a hard time thinking about anything right now. You want to start with level 1, easier things, and we move our way up. So just took one of the examples out of the book. So, each book has an activity on the left side, then you got the places you can write on the right. So this one says, write the name of one TV program you watched today, and at dinner, tell somebody the name of the show and any details you recall. So let's say that morning you watched the Today Show, and Jenna and Hoda were talking about the new book club, book of the month. So you would write down Today Show, book of the month. You might even write down the book. And then at dinner that night, when your family member said, what'd you do today? Well, I watched the Today Show this morning. I saw there was this book I was interested in. And you'd be like, oh, you know what? Sure can't remember the name of that book. Can't. Well, then you go back to the actual brain trainer and go, oh, yeah, I wrote it down right here. It was Beautiful Face, or, whatever it may be. So that way you're able to help recall. Okay. Level 2. We've got listen to someone reading or speaking on TV. This is all about that verbal memory we talked about, your ability to hear information and then recall it. So you listen to someone read or speak, then write down a single sentence that was spoken. So you could be watching, say you're watching Wheel of Fortune. Pat says something, you could write it down real quick, and then set an alarm on your phone, on your watch, whatever, for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, think, okay, can I think exactly that sentence that Pat said earlier? What did they say? And then you can check yourself by looking back in your book. So it could also be, you could do this if you're not even, on TV, if you're not watching TV. It could be your family member say something and you write down exactly what they said and then set a timer 5 minutes, see if you can remember what they said. That's really just trying to improve your ability to remember information that is spoken. And then level 3, this is on days where you're like, you know what, I'm doing great. I'm feeling good. I can use a little bit more of a challenge. You'll write out the name of your favorite singer. In this case, we use the example of Rod Stewart, and then you have to come up with as many words as you can, scrambling the letters of the name. Clearly, the more words you can come up with, the more flexible your brain is being and is thinking more outside the box. And you can do this with anything. I mean, you just write out your family. Let's say you're like, I can't remember my favorite singer's name. You just write your own name, first and last name, or write your family members' names, and then try to come up with as many words as you can, just using the letters in your own name. Just to try, like I said, to help improve that flexibility of thought. You'll also notice that in each of your notebook, in your books, in your brain trainers, we have this area where notes for my doctor, I accomplished, I still need help with. We thought this was important because a lot of times you could be working on things in your book and be like, oh, you know what? I should tell my doctor that. I should tell my doctor that I'm really having trouble remembering A, B, and C. Well, now you have a spot to put that information. We also thought it was important, at the end of each level for you to reflect on what you actually accomplished. Like, you know what? When I started this, I couldn't remember what day of the week it was, or I couldn't remember the day, the date. Now I'm remembering the day of the week and today's date every single day. I'm remembering 1 or 2 words of what people said, or, I can remember a sentence that somebody says for 15 minutes, and I can only remember for 1 minute when I started, just anything that you've accomplished. And then what you still need help with, like I'm still struggling finding my words. I'm still struggling to remember people's names. And you can write down that information as well. Just as a cue, so that way when you come back to see your physician, you can say, hey, these are the things I'm still having trouble with.